So how did you first find out about your Uncle Leslie Rogge's story?
Well, growing up, I had lots of stories from the family. Tons, of epic stories of my black sheep uncle that would do amazing things, totally illegal things, but he never hurt anybody and they were always fun, but he always seemed to be getting in trouble from birth. I mean, he shot out the street lights, in his cul-de-sac, when he was young, and then there was the couple dozen cars that he hot-wired before he was 15. So he was getting in trouble from birth, and the stories just kept on coming on. They never stopped, and as soon as he hit the big time when he was on the America's Most Wanted, it just took off from there.
How did you approach Leslie about the project?
Well, when he surrendered in 1995, he went to federal prison, and my mom and Les resurrected their friendship from long ago. He'd been on the run for 15 years. They hadn't spoken, and they started writing letters back and forth. And he would write letters, but in his letters were these great stories, and they weren't just stories of I did this and that. They included bank robbery stories, obviously, sailing around the world. He was an expert sailor. Trouble that he'd get in, just all kinds of individual stories that were amazing. So I took a handful to start with, and I put them in the computer. I was thinking that these stories were going to get lost. They were being put in a big plastic container in my mom's closet, and I wanted them to be around for my kids to read and for the next generation. So I decided to put them in the computer, and when I had about 20 or so of these stories, I decided to title them and put them in some sort of outline and see if I could format them into some sort of a book. And because they were hard because they spanned geography, decades, and they didn't have any kind of flow. So I titled them all. I gave them an outline, and I sent it to Les, and I said you got to put these in some sort of logical order for me. And so that's how it started.
At what point did you realize or decide that this book was going to be something you were going to publish and put out there for everyone?
Well, after we started into this, he was willing, to go on the book journey with me. But it needed so much more. There was so much there's so much to do in a biography. So much research to do that it just dawned on me that this should be, from his perspective. It would be the simplest. I could interject with a narrative to keep it flowing, and a view from different sides, like the FBI side. So he agreed, and that's when he helped me reassemble these stories and connect them as well. There was a lot of work there. The individual stories that he initially gave were very detailed, and then the work that we did after the fact, when we were putting this together, was pretty generic. So I overlaid the very detailed stories over his generalized new timeline, and that's when the book really started to take shape. So we were both happy with the direction it was going.
How did you conduct the interviews?
Mostly by pen and paper, the old-fashioned way. He would call me from time to time, but he could only call for a limited time, and that cost a lot of money, which he didn't have. Tried to funnel him some money, and that worked, but most of it were in letters back and forth. So that's a big reason why it took, close to 9 years. Plus, he'd go in the hole every now and then, and the prison would go into lockdown, and he'd disappear for weeks at a time. So there were major delays.
What about interviews with other people?
Well, there was a lot of travel. that had to be done. I visited Les several times, and I also visited Judy in Louisiana several times. And, you know, conducted interviews over the phone, tried to find people in his past, and corresponded with as many people in the story as I could. But the story was going on 20, 30 years ago, so a lot of the people weren't available, especially agents, federal, you know, FBI agents and U.S. Marshals.
Did you find conflicting accounts as you did your research?
No, I didn't. Judy brought up a few things that were a different opinion of the same story. Now, 30 years had gone by, so Les and Judy saw the same things, but they didn't have the exact same stories. They had smaller details that were different. But when Les wrote the initial stories 15 years ago, and then he recounted them, they were almost identical. Plus, there were lots of court documents, lots of newspaper articles, television shows, interviews, you know, that sort of thing that really backed up his story. So I never questioned the authenticity of his testimony, I guess you'd say, because it was all right there in the open.